Hey everyone. So we are here at the final lesson for the week. I know that the first two lessons were pretty cumbersome and lengthy. However, this one should be on the shorter side. And you would think that that would not be the case because the item that students struggle with the most, the one that creates the biggest obstacle for them when writing a research paper, are the citations. Students say all the time, I don't know how to cite. I don't understand how to cite. And I think the reason for that is because they don't actually understand what goes in the citation, because they've never really been taught the relationship between the reference entry for that source and the citation for that source. Once you have gone through the lesson on reference entries, which was a lengthier one, learning how to do citations is so much easier. So I hope that you really paid attention to that lesson on reference entries right before this one, so that this lesson on citations is as easy as it's supposed to be. Because it really makes a world of difference. If you understand the basics of APA format and how to create reference entries, learning how to do the citations is really easy. And you're going to see why. Let's go ahead, bring up our PowerPoint here. Okay. So, what are citations? Okay. If you're still not clear on this, that's okay. But they are used in the body of your paper, in your actual essay, from your introductory paragraph all the way through your concluding paragraph. They're used in the body of your paper to show your reader when and where you have incorporated source material. The citation, that's the part in parentheses, the citation allows you to give credit to the original author right then and there. Right there, as soon as you have used information from a source, you put in a citation immediately. It gives the reader the information they need to find that source on your references page. And then the source entry on the references page allows your reader to find that specific source for him or herself. Citations are what appear in parentheses immediately after the information from that source. The information in the parentheses will include the beginning of the source's reference entry, a comma, and the date of publication, or the abbreviation lowercase n period, lowercase d period, if there is no date available for a publication. Let's take a look real quick. We're going to go back to that sample APA essay that we looked at in the APA format basics lesson. Okay, so let's look through here, because we didn't really look at the actual essay in that lesson. We were looking more at the design elements, and then we looked a little bit at the references page. Let's look at the actual essay and examine the use of citation, just for a moment, okay? All right, so we start off. A majority of Americans experience stress in their daily lives. And then we have, parentheses, American Psychological Association, comma, 2017. Okay, we know that this information came from this source, American Psychological Association, and that it was published in 2017. Why do we put that information in the parentheses? Well, let's work backwards. We put the year of publication in parentheses to let our reader know that our source material is current and up to date. We put this in parentheses because that tells us This is how this source reference entry begins. The entry for this source begins with American Psychological Association. So if I want to find this source that they have cited here, I go all the way down to their references page. It's in alphabetical order, right? So I know it's going to be towards the top of the list. That's not it. Oh, there we go. American Psychological Association, 2017, Stress in America, the State of Our Nation. And here's the full URL that will take me right to that spot within the American Psychological Association's website. There was no individual author associated with this information. It came from an organization's website. So therefore, the author of this web page is the organization, American Psychological Association. That is how I created my reference entry. Once I had my reference entry created, I knew that whenever I used information from that source, way back up to the top, this is how I would cite it. How the entry begins, comma, year of publication. Right? So the majority of Americans experience stress in their daily lives. Thus, an important goal of psychological research is to evaluate techniques that promote stress reduction and relaxation. Two techniques that have been associated with reduced stress and increased relaxation in psychotherapy contexts are guided imagery and progressive muscle relaxation. Oh, citation. That tells me that they got this information here in this sentence from this source. Guided imagery aids individuals in connecting their internal and external experiences, allowing them, for example, to feel calmer externally because they practice thinking about calming imagery. Progressive muscle relaxation involves diaphragmatic breathing and the tensing and releasing of 16 major muscle groups. Together, these behaviors lead individuals to a more relaxed state. Oh, citation. We actually have two sources to cite here. Probably the information about guided imagery came from this first source, and the information about progressive muscle relaxation came from this source. But I can find both of them on the references page by looking for the entry that starts with Jacobson and then looking for the entry that starts with Trachtenberg. Guided imagery and progressive muscle relaxation are both cognitive behavioral techniques. Citation. I know I can find this source by looking for the entry on the references page that starts with Yalom and Leslie, right? In which individuals focus on the relationship among thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Citation. I know I can find this information in the source that starts with White on the references page. So, they used a citation every time they referred to information from a source. Notice that there are no direct quotes from these sources. Everything was paraphrased or summarized, but the citation is still there, okay? Let's look down, find something here. I am looking for a direct quote, meaning something that was taken word for word from the sources. Look at all of these citations that we have along the way, right? There's a handful here in the introductory paragraph. There's two here in this paragraph. One here, right? One here in this paragraph. Two here in this paragraph, actually. 1, 2, 3 here in this paragraph. One here. One here. It's not until page 4 that I find source material that was a direct quote. But here it is. Empirical research focused on guided imagery intervention supports the efficacy of the technique with a variety of populations within hospital settings, with positive outcomes for individuals diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. That came from this source. Guided imagery and relaxation techniques have been found to, quote, reduce distress and allow the immune system to function more effectively, end quote. Here's our citation. So we can see that no matter how the source material gets used in the essay, no matter how it's incorporated, summary, paraphrase, and direct quote, all of them require the citation immediately after that information is provided. If I want to know where this direct quote came from, it came from the source that starts the entry with Trachtenberg. I come down to the references page, alphabetical order, there's a lot of sources in this paper. Oh, there it is, Trachtenberg, right? And I know it's called The Effects of Guided Imagery on the Immune System, a Critical Review. I know that it's found in the International Journal of Neuroscience, Volume 118, Issue 6, pages 839 to 855. And this is the DOI link that I can use to go straight to that article if I want to. So if I have all of my reference trees already created, right? Then when it comes time to write my actual essay, starting with my intro and going all the way through my concluding paragraph, anytime I use information from a source, no matter how I use it, I know I need to provide the citation in parentheses. How do I know what to put in the parentheses? I come to the source on my references page. All right, I used a quote from this article right here. Okay, how does my reference entry begin? Begins like this, 2 authors. That's what's going to go in the parentheses and the year, right? Freebird meditation. If I used something from this YouTube video, the entry begins with the creator of the video, Freebird meditation. So that's what's going to go in my parentheses, plus the year, the date that it was uploaded. Okay. I'm going to go through different types of sources and how to figure out the citation. But this is really the gist of it. Create the reference entries first before you write any other part of the essay. You know what sources are going into your essay. Create the reference page first. Every reference entry, use the templates that are provided in the reference entries lesson that I went over before this one, or go to Purdue Online Writing Lab, go to apa.org, use a handbook, create the reference page first, ensuring that each entry is correct. Do all of that first. That way, as you are writing the draft, every time you use information from one of your sources, okay, I need to cite it. I know I need to cite it. What goes in the parentheses? Find that source on your list. How does the source begin? That's what's going to go first in my parentheses, then a comma, then the date of publication. That's it. Okay. Okay, so go back to our PowerPoint here. Let's try. Okay, book with one author. Here's the reference entry, right? And these are all the same examples that were taken from the reference entries lesson. If you go back to that PowerPoint, my example for a book with one author was this book, right? We learned how to create the reference entry for this book. Now that we have the reference entry, we know how to create the citation. How does the entry begin? With the author's last name. So that's what goes first in the parentheses. Then a comma, then my date of publication. That's it. A book with multiple authors. This was a book that had 2 authors, right? So my entry began Svensson, S, and Lober, L. That's what I'm going to put in my citation then. Svensson and Lober comma, what's my year of publication? 2020. We learned about what to do if you have a source with many authors, right? If you have 20 or less authors, you put them all in the citation. Every author's last name and first initial, separated by commas with an ampersand before the last author. But you only do that the first time you use that source in the essay. So unfortunately, if I'm using this source in my essay, I'm gonna have to list all of them the first time. Then after that, you can just put Wisconsin and others et al. And you probably get away with it even the first time you cite it, if this is how your citation looks. Because honestly, most readers are gonna be happy that you didn't put every single author's last name in the parentheses of your citation. That gets very cumbersome. So the reference entry has to list them all, but your citation can just say Wisconsin et al., comma, 2019. Right? If it's two authors, though, you list them both, Vincent and Rober. If it's 3 or 4 authors, go ahead and put all of those in the parentheses as well the first time, right? Okay, chapter in an edited book, all right? We learned how to create the reference entry for this source. And now how do we do the citation? Well, how does it start? Okay, we've got 3 authors here. I'm gonna go ahead and just put Aaron et al. 2019. Journal article, all right? We learned how to create the entry for this one. We have several authors here. We're going to go with the first one because that's how the entry begins. Grady et al. 2019. Newspaper article. You can see that the citations, it really doesn't matter what type of source it is, right? Because it all just depends on what starts the entry. The entry itself, the reference entry, that will depend on what type of source it is. But once it's time to do the citation, all you need to care about is how the entry starts. This one starts with this author's last name. So Carrie, comma, 2019. Blog post. All right, this was a blog written by an actual person, not an organization. So this was how the entry started. The author's last name, comma, first initial. So how does our citation begin? The author's last name, comma, date. YouTube video. We learned when we made the reference entry that the reference entry for a YouTube video should begin with the creator's title, the channel title. This one was Asian Boss. So that's what we put in our citation. Asian Boss, comma, 2020. Page on a news website, right? This was from the Huffington Post. This was our author, but that's how we started the entry. That's what goes in the citation. Bologna, comma, 2019. This was from a government agency, remember, the National Institute of Mental Health. So that's what started our entry. So that's what goes in our citation. I'm not going to look through the rest of this entry like, oh, was there a person? Was there an individual author? Do I need to look for someone's name to put in my parentheses? No, because if I did the entry correct, then this is how the entry begins. That's what goes in my citation. Right? From an organization author. This source was from the World Health Organization. I looked at my template and I figured out this is how my reference entry should be formatted. My reference entry begins with World Health Organization. So anytime I use information from this source in my essay, that's how my citation will start. The entry starts with World Health Organization. That's what goes in my citation. Then the date. A website with an individual author. This has an author, a person, an individual. So that's how my entry started. That's what will go in my citation. Website with no author. All right, so we're looking at this page, this article on MSN, and there's no author associated with it. So my reference entry template told me to start the entry with the title, All 33 Chile Miners Freed in Flawless Rescue. Now, I don't want to put a very cumbersome thing in my citation, so I can abbreviate, I can shorten the title. But you want to give enough of the title so that your reader can still find it easily when they go to your reference page. So I just chose All 33 Chile Miners. So still, if my reader is looking and sees this citation, and then they come to my reference page and find this, they're still going to be able to find the source pretty easily, All 33 Chile Miners. You have a website with no date. So let's pretend like that article here, we looked at it here as if it didn't have an author, but did have a date of publication. Now we're going to look at it like it has an author, but no date of publication. All right. So if it has an author, I know that's how my entry started. So that's what's going to go in my parentheses. I didn't have a date of publication. So in my entry, I put lowercase n period, lowercase d period. That's what I'm going to put in my citation too. No author and no date, right? So I'm looking at neurology on Wikipedia. There's no author associated with it. There's no date. So my template, when I created my reference entry, told me to start the entry with the section of the website I was looking at. I was looking at the section on neurology. My template told me that if there's no date of publication, then I need to use N period, D period. So that's what goes in my citation. Neurology, comma, N period, D period. All right. I think you guys probably get the gist of this for now, but let's go ahead and practice a few, just so you can see, I went through it pretty quickly, claiming that it's easy. Let's see how easy it is. All right, so I have this source here, and you might remember these sources, the practice sources are the same practice ones I used in the reference entry lesson. Remember, I went through all the templates for how to create entries for different types of sources, and then we practiced with 7, and I created the entry in real time in the lesson. I'm using those same sources, right? So I created the reference entry for this source. So now what would my citation be? Well, I look for how the entry begins, Doheny, comma, and then I look for the date of publication. Oh, we didn't have one. So lowercase n period, lowercase d period. There's my citation. Okay. All right. I have this source right here. Has a few authors associated with it. I created this entry. So how do I create this citation? How does it start? It starts with this author's last name. So E-B-B-Y. I'm not going to list them all. So E-T space A-L period. Then my comma. When was it published? 2018. There's my citation. Okay. I have something from Wikipedia, so I don't have an author. When I created the reference entry, it told me to start with the section of Wikipedia I was looking at. So how do I create my citation? Well, my entry begins with footprints. That's what I'm going to use, comma. I don't have a date, so N period, D period. There's my citation. Okay, this is a book, right? How do I create the citation for it? How does the entry begin on my references page? It begins with the author's last name. So Raffus. What's the year of publication? 2015. That's my citation. Okay. This one is from a book with 2 authors, right? So how do I do the citation? Well, my entry begins with this author's last name. So I definitely know that. But it's two authors, so my citation needs to provide both of them. So ampersand, Hacker, comma, what's my date of publication? Whoops, 2016. All right, so I have an article from a journal. Okay. How do I do the citation? It doesn't matter that it's an article from a journal. All I need to know is how the entry begins. It began with the author's last name. So that's what I put, comma, what year? 2012. That's it. It's not hard if you have the references list completed first. I cannot stress that enough. It makes everything so much easier when it comes to citations, because you know what goes in the parentheses for my citation. The first piece, the first half of the citation has to correspond to how that source entry begins on the references page. Well, how am I going to know how the source entry starts unless I've already created it? I have to create it first to know how it begins, and then I can figure out what goes in my parentheses for my citation. The date, that's easy. It's either going to be a year or it's going to be ND for no date. That part is not hard to figure out. It's the first half of the citation that students struggle with the most. And it's because they don't understand quite yet that it is supposed to correspond exactly to how the entries begin on the references page. So there's no way to know for sure what to put in your parentheses unless you've already done this step of creating the reference entry. Just because the references page comes at the end of your document doesn't mean it has to be the last thing you create. Create it first. It will save you so much time, so much frustration, and possibly save you from accidentally plagiarizing. But once you have it, look how easy it was to create these citations. That's it. That's all you do. So, here. Don't think that citations are complicated. The reference entries, comparatively, are more complicated than the citation. But even the reference entries, remember, you're not supposed to memorize all of this. Find the template for the type of source you're using and plug in the information. Create your reference entry. Create your reference entry for every single one of your sources, and then you know what goes in your citation for each source. Whatever that entry begins with, then a comma, then the date of publication. That's it. And you do that immediately after you have used information from that source, not at the end of the paragraph, not somewhere else in the paragraph. As soon as you finish typing out the information that you took from that source, boom, citation. Whether it's been summarized, whether it's been paraphrased, or whether you have provided a direct quote, it comes, boom, right after that source material. Remember that you know this based on our plagiarism lesson. Anytime you use information from a source, no matter how, you have to provide credit to that source with a citation. So any source that you use information from should be cited. Any source cited in the paper must be listed on your references page. It has to be. And the entry should match up. You have to make sure you have the reference entry correct So then you know what to put in your citation, and then it will match up exactly like it's supposed to. So anytime you use information from a source, cite it right away, immediately, right then and there, right after that information is typed out. Every source that gets used in the essay should be cited, and it should appear on the references page. Any source that's on the references page should have at least one citation provided somewhere in the essay, because the only sources that should be on that references page are the ones you actually used information from in the essay, right? The information in the citation, part that goes in the parentheses, is just however that source entry begins, a comma, and the date of publication. So creating the proper reference entry first will help you figure out what you put in the parentheses. And it's not just that it'll help you figure it out. It's easy then. Once the correct entry is created for that source, the citation's a piece of cake. How does the entry begin? Okay, that's what I put first in my parentheses, then a comma, then the date of publication. Once you understand the relationship among the reference entry and the citation, and you do the reference entry first, citations become so much easier. And all you got to remember is I have to provide a citation every time I use information from a source, no matter how I use information from a source. That'll help you avoid plagiarism, and it will help ensure that you have proper APA format. All right, that's it. And don't worry if you're still unsure, because you haven't tried to really do it yet. But trust me, if you take my advice, figure out your reference entries first, you'll start to see how much that helps when it's time to type up the rough draft and cite your sources. It helps. Having said that, obviously, if you have questions about anything in this week's lessons, APA format basics, reference entries, citations, don't hesitate to reach out. I will do whatever I can to help clarify and answer questions for you, whether it be through email, phone call. We can set up a one-on-one Zoom call if you want. Ask for help if you need it, because even though I can tell you all day long that APA format isn't something to be scared of, all you got to do for reference entries is look at the template, plug in the information. All you got to do for a citation is look at how the entry starts, and that's what you put in your parentheses. It sounds easy, and eventually it will be. But I know that once you get started on this, there might still be some worry and anxiety about it. Reach out. I'm not going to say, well, this is easy, you should know that. Did you go through the lessons? I mean, I will ask you if you went through the lessons, because I'm not going to repeat myself. But if you have gone through the lessons and you're still like, still just not sure about this, can you go through it one more time? I will change my approach to how I explain it, if that's the case. Don't hesitate. Reach out. Okay? Otherwise, you are free